Maya Chen had always been different, but she never expected her first day at Riverside Community College to feel like walking into a lion's den. At barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing no more than 100 pounds, she looked more like someone who belonged in a library than a martial arts dojo. Her thick-rimmed glasses and quiet demeanor only added to the impression that she was just another bookish student trying to fulfill her physical education requirements. The self-defense class was packed with students of all sizes, but Maya immediately noticed she was one of only 3 women in the room. The instructor, Marcus Rodriguez, was an imposing figure who stood 6 feet 4 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and a chest that seemed to strain against his black uniform. His reputation preceded him, a former Marine drill sergeant turned martial arts instructor who had trained professional fighters and law enforcement officers for over 15 years. As students filed into the training room, Maya could hear whispered conversations around her. "Why is she even here?" one muscular guy muttered to his friend. "She looks like she'd break if you looked at her wrong." Another student, a tall blonde woman named Jessica, rolled her eyes as she watched Maya carefully place her glasses in a protective case. "This is going to be embarrassing," Jessica said loud enough for others to hear. "She probably thinks this is like Karate Kid or something." Maya had heard it all before. Growing up in a small town in rural Oregon, she had been the target of similar comments throughout high school. Her parents owned a small restaurant, and after school she would help serve customers while other kids played sports or hung out at the mall. She was quiet, studious, and seemed to fade into the background wherever she went. What nobody knew was that Maya had been training in martial arts since she was 7 years old. Her grandfather, Chen Wei, had been a master of traditional Chinese martial arts before immigrating to America in the 1960s. In their family's restaurant basement, he had taught Maya the ancient techniques passed down through generations. While other kids learned to ride bikes, Maya was learning to move like water, to use an opponent's strength against them, and to strike with precision rather than power. Her grandfather always told her that the greatest warriors were those who looked least like warriors, but Maya had learned to keep her abilities hidden. In high school, she had tried to join the martial arts club, only to be laughed out of the room by the instructor who said she didn't have the build for fighting. After that humiliation, she decided it was easier to let people underestimate her than to constantly prove herself to skeptics. Now, standing in the college dojo surrounded by snickering classmates, Maya felt that familiar knot in her stomach. Instructor Rodriguez began his opening speech about the importance of self-defense, his voice booming across the room like a drill sergeant addressing new recruits. He talked about discipline, respect, and the reality of violence in the modern world. His eyes swept across the students, lingering disapprovingly on Maya. "Self-defense isn't about fancy moves you see in movies," Rodriguez announced, his gaze fixed on Maya as if she personally represented everything wrong with Hollywood martial arts. "It's about aggression, power, and the will to hurt your attacker before they hurt you. Some of you might think you've seen enough kung fu films to handle yourselves." Several students chuckled, and Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. The instructor continued his intimidating welcome speech, explaining that he would weed out students who weren't serious about learning real fighting skills. He described graphic scenarios of street attacks, home invasions, and violent assaults, his voice growing more intense with each example. Maya noticed several students shifting uncomfortably, but she remained perfectly still, her breathing calm and controlled, just as her grandfather had taught her. "I can tell by looking at some of you that you're not ready for what this class demands," Rodriguez said, walking slowly between the rows of students. When he passed Maya, he paused for a moment, shaking his head slightly. "Real fighting isn't about meditation and inner peace. It's ugly, brutal, and requires physical strength most of you simply don't possess." The message was clear, and Maya felt the familiar sting of being dismissed before she even had a chance to prove herself. Around her, she could see other students nodding in agreement with the instructor's harsh assessment. A few even glanced in her direction with expressions of pity, as if they felt sorry for her being in such an obviously inappropriate class. As the first session continued, Rodriguez demonstrated basic strikes and defensive positions, his movements were powerful but predictable, relying heavily on brute force and intimidation rather than technique or finesse. Maya watched carefully, noting the gaps in his stance, the way he telegraphed his movements, and how he relied too heavily on his size advantage. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Watch how they move when they think they're winning. That's when they show you their weaknesses. When it came time for partner exercises, Maya was paired with Jessica, the tall blonde who had made the earlier comment about embarrassment. Jessica towered over Maya by nearly a foot and clearly viewed the pairing as a waste of her time. Try to keep up, Jessica said condescendingly as they practiced basic blocking techniques. I don't want to accidentally hurt you. Maya nodded quietly and assumed the defensive position Rodriguez had demonstrated. Jessica's attacks were aggressive but sloppy, exactly what Maya had expected from someone who confused loudness with effectiveness. Maya easily deflected each strike, her movements so smooth and natural that Jessica didn't even realize how effortlessly she was being controlled. You're not even trying, Jessica complained, growing frustrated that none of her attacks were landing cleanly. You're supposed to resist more. Maya continued to defend herself with minimal effort, but she could see that her restraint was being mistaken for weakness. Other students began to notice their practice session, and she could hear more whispered comments about her performance. The familiar feeling of being misunderstood washed over her. But this time, something was different. This time she was tired of hiding who she really was. As the class session ended, Rodriguez made another announcement that would change everything. Next week we'll start sparring exercises, he declared. I'll be selecting partners based on size and experience level. Those who can't handle real contact should consider dropping the class now before they get hurt. His eyes found Maya once again, and this time his message was unmistakable. Maya gathered her things quietly as students filed out of the room, many of them still talking about how mismatched some of the class members were. She overheard Jessica telling her friends that she felt bad for the little Asian girl, who was clearly in over her head. Maya walked to her car in silence, but inside she was making a decision that would shock everyone in that dojo. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed, and tired of letting her grandfather's teachings remain hidden in the basement of a small-town restaurant. Next week, when the sparring began, she would finally show them what a real martial artist looked like. That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment staring at her grandfather's old training manual. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with detailed drawings of techniques that few people in America had ever seen. She traced her finger over the faded ink, remembering countless hours in the restaurant's basement where her grandfather had patiently corrected her form and taught her the philosophy behind each movement. Maya picked up her phone and dialed her grandfather's number. Even at 83, Chen Wei still worked in the restaurant every day, his movements as precise as they had been when he first started teaching her. "Grandfather," she said when he answered, "I need your advice about something." She told him about the self-defense class, about the instructor's dismissive attitude, and about the comments from her classmates. Her grandfather listened quietly, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. When she finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. "Maya," he said in his accented English, "I have taught you since you were a small child not to seek conflict, but sometimes conflict finds us anyway. Your grandmother used to say that hiding our light does not make the world brighter." Maya could hear the smile in his voice. "Maybe it is time for you to stop hiding." After hanging up, Maya spent the rest of the evening in her living room, practicing the forms her grandfather had taught her. Her movements were fluid and precise, each technique flowing into the next like a carefully choreographed dance. She practiced until sweat beaded on her forehead and her muscles remembered the familiar burn of proper training. The next morning at the restaurant, Maya found her grandfather preparing vegetables for the lunch rush. She had made her decision during the night and she wanted his blessing. "I'm going to show them," she said simply, "not to hurt anyone but to stop being invisible." Her grandfather nodded approvingly. "Good," he said, his weathered hands never pausing in their work. But remember what I have always taught you. The purpose of martial arts is not to defeat others, but to overcome yourself. Show them your skill, but also show them your character. Maya spent the week leading up to the next class session preparing mentally and physically. She reviewed techniques she hadn't practiced in months, focusing especially on defensive moves that could neutralize larger opponents without causing serious injury. She also researched Instructor Rodriguez, learning about his background and fighting style from online videos and martial arts forums. What she discovered was both helpful and concerning. Rodriguez was indeed a skilled fighter, but his technique was heavily influenced by his military background. He favored aggressive, straightforward attacks and relied on his size and strength to overwhelm opponents. However, Maya also found several competition videos where Rodriguez had struggled against smaller, more technical fighters who refused to engage in his preferred style of combat. Maya also learned that Rodriguez had a reputation for being particularly hard on students he deemed unsuitable for martial arts. Several former students had posted complaints online about his teaching methods, describing how he would publicly embarrass students to force them to drop his classes. The pattern was clear. Rodriguez saw himself as a gatekeeper who decided who belonged in the martial arts world and who didn't. Armed with this knowledge, Maya began to develop a strategy. She wouldn't try to outmuscle the instructor or engage in the kind of aggressive fighting he preferred. Instead, she would use his expectations against him, allowing him to underestimate her until the perfect moment presented itself. The second class session began much like the first, with Rodriguez delivering another intimidating speech about the realities of combat. Maya noticed that 3 students from the previous week had already dropped the class, probably scared off by the instructor's harsh approach. She also noticed that the remaining students seemed more confident, having survived the first week's psychological hazing. "Today we begin partner sparring," Rodriguez announced, his voice echoing off the walls of the training room. "I'll be pairing students based on size and experience. Remember, this isn't patty cake. I want to see aggression and commitment from each of you." Maya watched as Rodriguez began pairing students, generally matching people of similar builds. The larger male students were paired together, while the few remaining women were matched with each other. Maya expected to be paired with another small student, but Rodriguez had different plans. "Chen," he called out using her last name in the military style he preferred. "You'll be with Jackson." Maya looked around and saw a tall, muscular guy named Derek Jackson stepping forward. Derek was easily 6 feet tall and looked like he spent most of his free time in the gym. He was also one of the students who had made disparaging comments about Maya during the first class. Derek looked down at Maya with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Seriously, coach?" he asked. "I mean, no offense, but this isn't exactly fair." Several other students murmured in agreement, and Maya could see the familiar look of pity in their eyes. Rodriguez smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Life isn't fair, Jackson. Sometimes you have to deal with situations that don't match your expectations. Consider this a lesson in adaptability." Maya realized that the instructor wasn't trying to create a fair sparring match. He was setting up what he expected to be a quick demonstration of why she didn't belong in his class. As the other pairs began their sparring exercises, Maya found herself face to face with Derek in the center of the mat. The other students had formed a loose circle around them, clearly expecting to witness Maya's quick defeat. Even Derek seemed uncomfortable with the situation, clearly not wanting to be responsible for hurting someone so much smaller than himself. "Look," Derek said quietly as they assumed their starting positions. "I'll take it easy, okay? Just try to make it look good so Rodriguez doesn't get on your case." Maya nodded and gave him a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "But you don't need to worry about me." Derek's expression showed that he clearly didn't understand what she meant, but before he could ask for clarification, Rodriguez called for the sparring to begin. Derek moved forward cautiously, throwing a slow, telegraphed punch that was obviously intended to give Maya time to block or dodge. Maya could have easily avoided the punch, but instead she let it connect lightly with her shoulder, stumbling backward, as if the gentle tap had been a devastating blow. The watching students laughed, and she could see Rodriguez shaking his head in disgust. Derek looked mortified, clearly not intending for even his pulled punch to land. "Come on, Chen," Rodriguez shouted. "At least pretend you're trying to defend yourself." Maya reset her position and nodded to Derek to continue. This time, Derek threw a slightly faster punch, still holding back but putting a bit more effort into the attack. Maya blocked it cleanly but made the block look clumsy and off balance. She was carefully studying Derek's movement patterns while maintaining the appearance of incompetence. After a few more exchanges where Maya convincingly played the role of the overwhelmed beginner, Rodriguez stopped the sparring session. "Enough," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "Jackson, you're holding back too much. Chen, you're not even trying. Let me show you how this should be done." Maya felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear. This was exactly what she had been hoping would happen. Rodriguez was going to spar with her personally, giving her the opportunity she had been waiting for. Around the training room, the other students stopped their own exercises to watch what they expected to be a quick lesson in reality. Rodriguez stepped onto the mat, his massive frame making Maya look even smaller by comparison. The size difference was so dramatic that several students actually gasped. "Sometimes the best way to learn is through experience," Rodriguez announced to the class. "Chen, I want you to attack me with everything you've got. Don't hold back." Maya bowed respectfully, a gesture that caused a few students to snicker. Rodriguez didn't return the bow, instead settling into an aggressive fighting stance that emphasized his reach and power advantages. Maya assumed a much more relaxed position, her hands held loosely at her sides in a way that looked completely defenseless to the untrained eye. "Remember," Rodriguez said loudly enough for the entire class to hear, "real fighting isn't about fancy techniques or movie moves. It's about aggression and the will to dominate your opponent." He looked directly at Maya as he spoke, making it clear that she represented everything he thought was wrong with people's understanding of martial arts. Maya nodded quietly and prepared herself for what was about to happen. Everything her grandfather had taught her, every hour spent training in that basement restaurant, every technique passed down through generations of her family, it was all leading to this moment. She thought about her grandfather's words about not hiding her light, and she made a silent promise to herself that after today she would never hide again. The training room fell completely silent as Maya and Rodriguez faced each other on the mat. The contrast between them was striking. Rodriguez's bulky frame cast a shadow over Maya's small figure, making the upcoming confrontation look less like a sparring match and more like a cautionary tale about knowing one's limitations. Rodriguez cracked his knuckles loudly, a sound that echoed through the quiet room like gunshots. "I want everyone to watch carefully," he announced to the class, never taking his eyes off Maya. "This is what happens when people confuse fantasy with reality. Real combat isn't about inner peace or spiritual nonsense. It's about physical dominance." Maya remained perfectly still, her breathing slow and controlled. Her grandfather's voice whispered in her mind, "Wait for the storm to reveal its pattern. Even the mightiest typhoon has a calm center." She watched Rodriguez's stance, noting how his weight was distributed, how his shoulders telegraphed his intentions, and how his ego was making him predictable. "Whenever you're ready, Chen," Rodriguez said with a condescending smile. "Don't be afraid to really try. I can handle whatever you think you can dish out." Maya bowed again, a gesture that prompted more snickers from the watching students. This time, however, her bow was different. It wasn't the nervous, apologetic gesture of someone who knew they were outmatched. It was the formal, respectful bow of a martial artist preparing for combat. The subtle difference was lost on everyone except Rodriguez, who suddenly looked less certain about what was about to happen. Rodriguez made the first move, throwing a powerful right hook that would have knocked most people unconscious if it had connected. But Maya was no longer where the punch was aimed. She had moved with liquid grace, stepping inside Rodriguez's guard, while the instructor's momentum carried him forward. Before Rodriguez could recover his balance, Maya struck. Her palm strike connected with Rodriguez's solar plexus with surgical precision. To the watching students, it looked like nothing more than a gentle push. Rodriguez, however, suddenly found himself unable to breathe, his diaphragm seized by the perfectly placed strike. He stumbled backward, gasping for air, while Maya returned to her neutral stance. The class erupted in confused murmurs. Most students hadn't even seen Maya move, and those who had witnessed the strike couldn't understand why their intimidating instructor was suddenly doubled over and struggling to catch his breath. Jessica laughed nervously. What happened? Did she even touch him? Rodriguez slowly straightened up, his face red with embarrassment and lack of oxygen. The fact that he had been caught off guard by someone he had publicly dismissed was bad enough, but being unable to explain to his class what had just happened made it infinitely worse. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Maya, seeing her clearly for the first time. Lucky shot, he muttered, though his voice carried less conviction than before. He reset his stance, this time being more cautious about his approach. Maya remained motionless, watching and waiting with the patience her grandfather had drilled into her during thousands of hours of training. Rodriguez tried a different approach, attempting to grab Maya and use his size advantage to control the fight on the ground. But as his hands reached for her, she simply wasn't there. Maya moved like smoke, slipping away from his grasp and repositioning herself before Rodriguez could understand what had happened. Her movement was so smooth that several students actually blinked, wondering if they had imagined it. Growing frustrated, Rodriguez became more aggressive. He threw a combination of punches designed to overwhelm Maya with sheer volume of attacks. Maya responded by demonstrating what real defensive skill looked like. She moved through his assault like water flowing around rocks, each of Rodriguez's powerful strikes missing by mere inches, while Maya remained completely calm and controlled. The watching students began to quiet down as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Maya's movements were nothing like the awkward, hesitant gestures she had shown during the previous week's class. She moved with a fluid grace that made Rodriguez's attacks look clumsy and predictable by comparison. Derek, who had sparred with Maya just minutes before, stared in amazement at the transformation. Rodriguez, breathing hard from his failed attacks, stepped back and reassessed his opponent. The dismissive confidence that had defined his approach was gone, replaced by the focused attention of someone who finally understood they were in a real fight. "What style is that?" he asked, his instructor's curiosity temporarily overriding his wounded pride. "Traditional Chinese martial arts," Maya replied quietly. "My grandfather taught me." Rodriguez nodded, some of his respect for Maya's skill showing in his expression. But his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of his class. He had built his reputation on being the toughest instructor at the college, and losing to someone like Maya would undermine everything he had worked to establish. "Traditional arts are pretty, but they don't work in real fights," Rodriguez said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as his students. "Let me show you what real combat looks like." Rodriguez charged forward with renewed aggression, throwing his full weight behind a devastating right cross that would have ended the fight if it had landed. Maya had been waiting for exactly this kind of attack. As Rodriguez committed fully to his punch, Maya stepped forward to meet him, moving inside his guard where his reach advantage became a liability. What happened next was so fast that most of the class missed it entirely. Maya caught Rodriguez's attacking arm, used his own momentum against him, and in one fluid motion swept his legs while redirecting his energy toward the ground. Rodriguez, who outweighed Maya by more than 100 pounds, found himself airborne for a brief moment before crashing to the mat with a sound that echoed throughout the training room. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez lay on his back, staring at the ceiling with a mixture of shock and confusion. Maya stood beside him, completely unruffled, not even breathing hard despite the fact that she had just thrown a man twice her size. The watching students looked like they had just witnessed something impossible. Jessica was the first to break the silence. "How did she do that?" she whispered to the student next to her. "He's huge, and she just threw him?" Maya extended her hand to help Rodriguez up, another gesture that demonstrated both her skill and her character. Rodriguez looked at her offered hand for a moment before accepting it, allowing Maya to help him to his feet. As he stood up, brushing off his uniform, he looked at Maya with new eyes. "That was a textbook hip throw," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect for the first time. Your grandfather taught you well. The admission that Maya had superior technique was difficult for Rodriguez to make, but his instructor's integrity wouldn't let him deny what everyone had just witnessed. Maya bowed again, this time receiving a respectful bow in return from Rodriguez. The gesture marked a fundamental shift in their relationship and in the atmosphere of the entire class. Maya was no longer the out-of-place student who didn't belong in a martial arts setting. She was a skilled practitioner who had earned her place through demonstrated ability. But Maya wasn't finished yet. She had spent too many years hiding her abilities, too many years letting people underestimate and dismiss her. Today was about more than just proving she belonged in the class. Today was about showing everyone, including herself, that she was done being invisible. Sir, Maya said respectfully to Rodriguez, would you like to continue the sparring session? I think I can do better than that. Rodriguez looked at Maya with surprise and growing admiration. Most people, after successfully throwing someone of his size and reputation, would have been content to quit while they were ahead. Maya's willingness to continue showed a confidence and dedication to the art that Rodriguez hadn't expected to find in a student like her. The other students pressed closer to the mat, suddenly very interested in what was happening. Word was already spreading to other classes, and Maya could see faces appearing in the doorway as news of the confrontation reached other students in the building. What had started as a simple sparring exercise was becoming something much more significant. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since the class had begun, but this time his smile carried genuine warmth rather than condescension. All right, Chen, he said, settling back into his fighting stance. Let's see what else your grandfather taught you. The atmosphere in the training room had completely transformed. What had begun as a routine sparring demonstration had evolved into something approaching a formal challenge match. Students from other classes had filtered into the room, drawn by whispered reports of the impossible scene they had missed. Even other instructors had appeared in the doorway, curious about the commotion coming from Rodriguez's usually predictable class. Maya could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching her every movement. For someone who had spent most of her life trying to remain invisible, the sudden attention was overwhelming. But as she looked at Rodriguez preparing for their continued sparring, she felt something she had never experienced before. The complete absence of fear about being judged. She had already proven herself in the most dramatic way possible. Rodriguez's approach was now entirely different from his earlier attacks. Gone was the overconfident swagger and the assumption that size alone would determine the outcome. Instead, he moved with the careful respect of someone facing a legitimate opponent. His stance was more balanced, his movements more calculated, and his eyes never left Maya's face as he tried to read her intentions. Maya responded by showing more of her true ability. Her stance shifted slightly, becoming more rooted while maintaining the fluid readiness that characterized her grandfather's style. She moved her hands in small circular patterns that looked almost like a meditative exercise, but served to maintain perfect balance and readiness for attacks from any direction. Rodriguez attempted a series of quick jabs, testing Maya's defensive capabilities now that he understood she was a serious opponent. Maya's response was a masterclass in traditional martial arts defensive theory. Instead of simply blocking or dodging, she redirected each attack in ways that left Rodriguez slightly off balance and positioned poorly for follow-up strikes. Her movements were so economical that she seemed to barely move at all. Yet Rodriguez found himself unable to land a clean hit. She's not even trying hard, Derek whispered to Jessica, who was watching the sparring session with fascination. Look at her breathing. She's not even winded. Jessica nodded, remembering her own sparring session with Maya from the previous week. She was holding back with me, she realized aloud. She could have made me look like a complete beginner, but she let me think I was doing okay. The revelation that Maya had been deliberately concealing her abilities spread through the watching students. Several of them began to reconsider their interactions with her, remembering moments when they had made dismissive comments or assumptions about her capabilities. The quiet girl they had barely noticed was revealing herself to be one of the most skilled martial artists they had ever seen. Rodriguez stepped back and gestured for a brief pause. Your defensive work is exceptional, he admitted to Maya, loud enough for the class to hear. "But let me see your offensive capabilities. In real, self-defense situations, you can't just defend forever." Maya nodded respectfully. "My grandfather taught me that the best defense comes from understanding your opponent's intentions," she replied. "May I demonstrate?" Rodriguez agreed, and what followed was a display of martial arts skill that none of the watching students would ever forget. Maya began to move with an aggressive fluidity that seemed to defy physics. Her attacks came from unexpected angles, using her smaller size as an advantage rather than a limitation. She struck high and low in rapid succession, keeping Rodriguez constantly guessing about where the next attack would come from. But what was most impressive wasn't the power behind Maya's strikes, but their precision. Every attack landed exactly where she intended it to, with just enough force to demonstrate her control without causing actual injury. Rodriguez found himself on the receiving end of a dozen different striking techniques, each one demonstrating a different aspect of traditional Chinese martial arts. Maya demonstrated palm strikes that could have broken ribs if delivered with full force, but instead simply tapped Rodriguez hard enough to show their accuracy. She showed knee strikes, elbow strikes, and kicks that came from angles Rodriguez hadn't expected. Most impressively, she demonstrated throws and takedowns that used leverage and timing rather than strength, repeatedly putting Rodriguez on the ground despite their size difference. With each exchange, the watching crowd grew larger and more amazed. Students were pulling out their phones to record the demonstration, though Maya was moving so quickly that the cameras struggled to capture the full scope of what was happening. Someone had apparently notified the college's athletics department, because Maya could see official-looking adults in suits taking notes from the back of the room. Rodriguez, to his credit, was learning and adapting as the sparring continued. His military training had taught him to analyze opponents and adjust tactics accordingly. He began to anticipate some of Maya's movements and even managed to land a few light strikes of his own. But it was clear to everyone watching that Maya was controlling the pace and intensity of their encounter. After several more minutes of intensive sparring, Maya executed a technique that left no doubt about her mastery of martial arts. As Rodriguez threw a powerful overhand right, Maya seemed to disappear from directly in front of him, only to reappear at his side. In one continuous motion, she trapped his attacking arm, disrupted his balance with a subtle foot sweep, and guided him into a controlled fall that left him on his back with Maya's hand positioned at his throat in a perfect finishing position. The technique was executed so smoothly that it looked choreographed, but Rodriguez's shocked expression made it clear that everything had happened exactly as Maya intended. She had demonstrated complete control over the fight, showing that she could have ended the encounter at any time she chose. The training room erupted in spontaneous applause. Students who had been making jokes about Maya just an hour earlier were now cheering for her performance. Even the other instructors who had come to observe were nodding with professional appreciation for the skill they had just witnessed. Maya immediately helped Rodriguez to his feet, maintaining the respectful demeanor that characterized traditional martial arts training. Rodriguez stood up slowly, brushing off his uniform once again, but this time his expression showed genuine admiration rather than embarrassed surprise. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there at the beginning of class. "This is what real martial arts looks like. Miss Chen has just demonstrated more authentic fighting skill than most people develop after years of training." The praise from someone of Rodriguez's reputation and experience meant more to Maya than all the applause from her fellow students. She had spent so many years hiding her abilities that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to receive recognition for her skills from another martial artist. But even as Maya basked in the acknowledgement of her abilities, she realized that the demonstration had changed more than just how people saw her. It had changed how she saw herself. For the first time in her life, she understood what her grandfather had meant when he talked about not hiding her light. The confidence and self-assurance she felt in this moment was something she wanted to carry with her beyond the walls of the training room. Rodriguez addressed the class once more, but his tone was now completely different from his earlier intimidating speeches. "I owe Miss Chen and all of you an apology," he said. I made assumptions based on appearances rather than taking the time to understand what each student might bring to this class. That's not the kind of instructor I want to be, and it's not the kind of person any of us should be. The admission of error from someone as proud as Rodriguez carried significant weight with the students. Maya could see in their faces that they were processing not just the demonstration of martial arts skill they had witnessed, but also the larger lesson about judging people based on assumptions and stereotypes. As the formal class session concluded, and students began to file out of the training room, Maya found herself surrounded by classmates who wanted to learn more about her background and training. The same students who had ignored or dismissed her were now eager to talk with her, ask questions about her grandfather's teaching methods, and understand how she had developed such impressive skills. Maya answered their questions graciously, but part of her attention was focused on what this day would mean for her future. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She could never again be the invisible student who faded into the background. Nor did she want to be. The confidence she had discovered today was something she intended to nurture and build upon. By the next morning, Maya's demonstration had become the talk of the entire college. Video clips recorded by students on their phones had spread across social media platforms, though the poor quality of the recordings only added to the mystique of what people were calling the most amazing martial arts display ever seen on campus. Maya found herself recognized and approached by complete strangers as she walked between classes, an experience that was both thrilling and overwhelming for someone accustomed to anonymity. The college newspaper had already contacted her for an interview, and the athletics department had left 3 voice messages requesting a meeting to discuss potential opportunities. Maya's academic advisors were suddenly much more interested in her schedule and future plans, clearly hoping to keep a student who had brought positive attention to the college. But the response wasn't universally positive. Maya noticed that some students seemed intimidated by her newfound reputation, giving her a wider berth in hallways and speaking more quietly when she was nearby. A few seemed almost resentful, as if her revelation of hidden abilities had somehow deceived them. Maya realized that her dramatic transformation from invisible student to campus celebrity came with complications she hadn't anticipated. The most significant change was in her self-defense class. When Maya arrived for the 3rd session, she found the training room packed with more than double the usual number of students. Word had spread about what had happened the previous week, and students from other classes had requested permission to observe or even transfer into Rodriguez's program. Rodriguez himself seemed energized by the attention his class was receiving. He greeted Maya with a respectful nod and immediately began incorporating her into his teaching methodology. Miss Chen has agreed to help demonstrate proper defensive techniques, he announced to the expanded class. I want everyone to observe how she moves and try to understand the principles behind her methods. Maya found herself in the unexpected position of assistant instructor, helping Rodriguez explain concepts and demonstrate techniques to fascinated students. Her grandfather's teachings, which had been confined to a restaurant basement for so many years, were now being shared with dozens of eager learners in a formal academic setting. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that she was now teaching the same students who had dismissed her just a week earlier. Jessica, who had made condescending comments about Maya's appearance and abilities, was now hanging on every word of Maya's technical explanations. Derek, who had felt sorry for her during their sparring session, was now asking detailed questions about footwork and timing. But Maya's new visibility came with unexpected challenges. During a break between demonstrations, she overheard 2 male students talking near the equipment storage area. I bet she's been training her whole life and just pretending to be some helpless bookworm, one of them said. It's like she was lying to everyone about who she really was. The comment stung more than Maya had expected. She realized that some people saw her previous discretion about her abilities as a form of deception, rather than simple privacy. The accusation that she had been pretending to be someone she wasn't forced Maya to confront questions about identity and authenticity that she hadn't considered before. That evening, Maya called her grandfather again, seeking guidance about the complex emotions she was experiencing. I thought showing my abilities would make things simpler, she told him. But now some people think I was lying about who I am, and others are treating me like I'm completely different from who I was before. Her grandfather listened thoughtfully before responding. Maya, you have not changed. You are the same person who helped in restaurant, who studied hard in school, who treated everyone with kindness. The only thing that has changed is that now, people see one more part of who you have always been. His words helped Maya understand that the complexity she was feeling wasn't about her own identity, but about other people's limited understanding of who she was. She had never hidden her true self. She had simply chosen not to display every aspect of her abilities in every situation. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to the self-defense class. Master Liu Chen, a renowned martial arts instructor from the State University, had driven 3 hours to meet Maya after seeing the viral videos of her demonstration. Master Liu was in his 70s, with a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable traditional martial arts teachers on the West Coast. Master Liu observed Maya's movements during class with the expert eye of someone who had devoted his life to martial arts study. After the session ended, he approached Maya with a formal bow that immediately identified him as someone from the traditional martial arts community. Your grandfather taught you well, Master Liu said in Mandarin, surprising Maya with his use of her native language. I can see his influence in every technique you perform. Would you be willing to visit my school? I believe my advanced students could learn much from your family's methods. The invitation was both an honor and an opportunity that Maya had never imagined possible. Master Liu's school was famous throughout the martial arts community, and training there would connect Maya to a network of serious practitioners and instructors across the country. But the opportunity also raised questions about her future that Maya wasn't sure she was ready to answer. She had come to college to study business, planning to eventually help expand her family's restaurant. The idea of becoming deeply involved in the martial arts community represented a completely different life path. Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation, added his own encouragement. Maya, you have a gift that shouldn't be wasted, he said. I've been teaching for 15 years and I've never seen anyone with your natural ability and technical knowledge. You could help preserve and teach methods that are becoming rare in this country. Maya felt the weight of unexpected responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her grandfather's teachings, passed down through generations of her family, represented knowledge that few people in America possessed. The possibility that she could play a role in preserving and sharing that knowledge was both exciting and daunting. Over the following days, Maya found herself caught between different visions of her future. Her parents expected her to complete her business degree and help grow the family restaurant. Her new martial arts connections were offering opportunities to study and teach at advanced levels. Her college friends were encouraging her to pursue the sudden celebrity that had come with her demonstration. The situation became even more complex when the college's athletics department formally offered Maya a position as a martial arts instructor, with the possibility of developing a new traditional Chinese martial arts program. The offer included a scholarship to complete her degree and a salary that would help support her family's business. Maya realized that her decision to reveal her abilities had opened doors she hadn't known existed, but it had also created obligations and expectations that she hadn't anticipated. The simple goal of proving she belonged in the self-defense class had evolved into a much larger question about how she wanted to use her skills and knowledge. As she sat in the restaurant basement, where her grandfather had first taught her to punch and kick, Maya reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. The quiet student who had tried to blend into the background was gone forever, replaced by someone who would have to make choices about how to use abilities that were no longer secret. The weight of her grandfather's legacy, the expectations of new mentors and opportunities, and her own desires for the future all demanded decisions that would shape the rest of her life. Maya understood that the moment she had chosen to stop hiding had been just the beginning of a much larger transformation. 3 months after the demonstration that changed everything, Maya stood in front of a room full of college administrators, martial arts masters, and media representatives. The occasion was the official launch of Riverside Community College's new traditional Chinese martial arts program, with Maya as its youngest instructor in the college's history. The journey to this moment had been filled with difficult decisions and unexpected revelations about herself. Maya had ultimately chosen to embrace the opportunities that her revealed abilities had created, but not without carefully considering what that choice meant for her family, her future, and her own sense of identity. Her grandfather sat in the front row, wearing his best suit and beaming with pride. Beside him sat her parents, who had initially been concerned about Maya's deviation from their planned path, but had come to understand the significance of what their daughter was accomplishing. Master Liu was there as well, having become both a mentor and a colleague in the months since their first meeting. Rodriguez, now wearing the formal uniform of a deputy instructor in Maya's program, had undergone his own transformation during the previous months. Working closely with Maya had humbled him in ways that made him a better teacher and a more thoughtful person. He had learned to see potential in students regardless of their appearance or background, and his classes had become more inclusive and effective as a result. The program they had developed together combined traditional Chinese martial arts techniques with modern self-defense applications, creating something that honored Maya's grandfather's teachings while making them accessible to contemporary students. Maya had insisted that the program emphasize character development and personal growth alongside physical techniques, ensuring that students understood martial arts as more than just fighting skills. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maya herself. The confident young woman addressing the assembled crowd bore little resemblance to the quiet student who had tried to hide in the back of Rodriguez's class. Maya had learned to embrace visibility and leadership, understanding that her abilities came with responsibilities to both preserve tradition and adapt it for new generations. When I first walked into Instructor Rodriguez's class, Maya told the audience, I was afraid that showing my abilities would make me different from everyone else. What I learned is that we all have hidden strengths and talents that we keep locked away because we're afraid of how others might react. She gestured toward the group of students who had been part of that original self-defense class, many of whom had continued training with her and had become some of her most dedicated pupils. Jessica had discovered a natural talent for the philosophical aspects of martial arts and was writing her senior thesis on the intersection of Eastern philosophy and modern psychology. Derek had found that martial arts training helped him manage anger issues he had struggled with for years. The most important lesson I've learned, Maya continued, is that hiding our light doesn't protect us from judgment. It just prevents us from discovering what we're truly capable of achieving. The speech was interrupted by spontaneous applause, but Maya wasn't finished. She had one more story to tell, one that explained why this moment meant so much to her family. My grandfather came to America 50 years ago with nothing but his knowledge of traditional martial arts and a dream of building a better life for his family. He worked in restaurant kitchens and saved every penny to open his own business, all while preserving the martial arts traditions that had been passed down through generations of our family. Maya looked directly at her grandfather as she spoke, seeing tears in his eyes as she publicly honored his sacrifices and dedication. He taught me that true strength isn't about defeating others. It's about overcoming the limitations we place on ourselves. This program exists because he had the wisdom to preserve ancient knowledge and the faith to believe that someday it would find new ways to serve others. The formal presentation concluded with a demonstration by Maya and her advanced students, showcasing the techniques and principles that formed the foundation of their program. But this demonstration was different from the one that had started it all. Instead of being about proving herself to skeptics, it was about sharing knowledge with people who were eager to learn. As the event wound down and guests began to leave, Maya found herself reflecting on the unpredictable path that had led her to this moment. She had started college planning to study business and help her family's restaurant. Instead, she had discovered a calling that combined her deepest skills with her desire to help others. The restaurant would continue to thrive with her parents' management, and Maya would continue to help when she could. But she had found a way to honor her grandfather's legacy while creating something new and valuable for her community. The traditional martial arts program had already attracted students from other colleges and was being studied as a model for similar programs across the country. Rodriguez approached Maya as she was packing up her equipment after the demonstration. I owe you an apology that I've never properly given, he said. I almost made you quit martial arts because of my own narrow-minded assumptions. I'm grateful every day that you had the courage to prove me wrong." Maya smiled and shook Rodriguez's hand. "We both learned something important that day," she replied. "You learned not to judge students by their appearance, and I learned that I don't have to hide who I am to be accepted by others." As Maya drove home that evening, she passed the small apartment where she had lived when she first started college. The quiet, invisible student who had once lived there seemed like a different person entirely, though Maya understood that all the essential parts of who she was had remained constant. She had simply learned to stop hiding them. Her phone buzzed, with a text message from her grandfather. "Your grandmother would be so proud to see what you have built with the knowledge she helped me preserve. You have honored our family's tradition while making it your own." Maya pulled over to read the message fully, feeling the weight of 3 generations of martial arts knowledge that had led to this moment. Her great-grandmother had practiced these same techniques in China decades before Maya was born. Her grandfather had preserved them through immigration and adaptation to a new country, and now Maya was sharing them with a new generation of students who would carry them forward into the future. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had learned that true confidence doesn't come from hiding your abilities or from showing off your skills. It comes from understanding your own worth and sharing your gifts with others in ways that make the world a little bit better. The shy college student who had been afraid to reveal her martial arts training had become a confident instructor who understood that her greatest strength had never been her fighting ability. Her greatest strength was her willingness to help others discover their own hidden potential, just as her grandfather had helped her discover hers so many years ago in the basement of a small-town restaurant. Maya drove home knowing that tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to share the knowledge that had shaped her life. She was no longer hiding her light under a bushel, and the world was brighter for it.